1920s that our throughputs and our industrial output was going to start to go down because there were going to be a series of tipping points, mostly because of the impact of population growth and the fact that we were creating such an impact in terms of our natural resource use. So that juxtaposition has pretty much led us to the tipping points that we're seeing in the 2020s. Lo and behold, they predicted this in 1972. Now, I wanted to bring in, and some of you may have been at my talk yesterday, the relationship between manufacturing, between our impact on natural resources and social impacts. And I think what's really important is also to think through some of the authors that had already started to think through this in 1972. So if you look at Donella Meadows, who very much was, as an economist, but also as a woman who was very much engaged in how we can shift our society away from a consumption-based society, she very much talked about what was the first commandment of economics, which was to grow forever, right? Productivity, GDP growth. And that national economies were going to continue to swell. But what she also felt was very important was that we start to understand that in our Earth systems, we actually needed to live within enough. Our Earth systems are triggered that way. When you look at the way in which ecosystems function, they're constantly actually functioning in a holistic manner. Hence why we also now, more and more, are talking about biomimicry, the way in which we stay within natural boundaries, and using and looking at nature as a leader in thought leadership with regard to the way in which we can actually manufacture. But everything that is born on the earth grows to its appropriate size and then stops. And yet we, as human species, are not doing that. How can we then stay within our planetary boundaries if we don't think about the way in which nature actually is triggered to stay within its own boundaries? And that's how we can learn. The other very important point about the work that Donella did was to think through leverage points. And she came up with key leverage points through corporations, through economies, through cities. What then are the areas where we can really trigger change? And what does that actually look like? Next slide, please. So what I wanted to do was lead you through some of my own thinking and the way in which I'm also guiding President von der Leyen and the European Commission and the institutions in terms of the relationship that we have now, especially through what we call the European Green Deal, and how we can use the European Green Deal as a way to really anchor a shift in our policy making and our relationship between industry and what we want to do in terms of reducing our impact on the environment and climate change. So going from the limits to growth, we've actually integrated the planetary boundaries into the work that I talked about yesterday, Earth for All. And one of the co-authors is Johan Rockström, who I'm working very closely with. So the author, the thinker behind the planetary boundaries. Next slide, please. And from there, what we've started to do, working also with others within the European Commission, so in particular Janusz Potočnik, who is the former commissioner for environment and then research and innovation, is to think through, well, what are the key elephants in the room? And in particular, going back to the essence of consumption and thinking through, okay, well, the West has been fueled by natural resources from the South. That's where we are. European Union, if we look at our colonialistic dependency on natural resources from the South, we're seeing the international efforts to fight the climate crisis and other environmental crises, but it's predominantly focused on the supply side and technology. We're looking at greening the supply side, but that's not going to be enough. We're not looking at circularity in the way in which we should. We're not